exhibiting. When I started exhibiting 10, 12 years ago, my husband came into the office and said, why don't you collect rabbits on stamps? And I was collecting China rabbits and which were taking up a lot of space. And I said, that sounds good. And now, so I worked myself up to golds and some other things, but not everything worked. And so now we're going to talk about you. I'm also an APS accredited judge. I sit on the board of CANIG, and I'm on the National Coastal History Museum board. So I get around the country, which is great fun. So we talked about you and Smokey the Bear. Let's hear about you.
I have been accumulating Lepidoptera on stamps for about 20, 25 years, and they're just sitting there in about 45 3-inch binders.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, I'm either going to get rid of them or I'm going to do something with them.
Lepidoptera is
Butterflies.
Butterflies and moths.
So in your collection, are you just concentrating on, you just got stamps, or have you got covers?
Stamps, covers, a lot of different items.
Have you got archival material as well?
Pardon?
Archival material, the essays and the diaproofs? No,
I have a few.
okay.
From my perspective, it's very difficult
Come in.
to buy something like that and know that I'm getting what I should be getting.
Okay. Well, we can talk about that too. Okay. As you find out, there are many ways to exhibit as exhibitors. There's display, there's traditional. What we're going to do is we're going to cover the basics, but not all the classes. We're going to concentrate on traditional coastal history and display. Before we go on, why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, okay. I'm Autumn Hanley. I'm from the Young Philatelic Leaders Fellowship, and I'm in the exhibitor track. I'm currently working on an exhibit about bees.
Okay, we got butterflies, and we have Smokey the Bear.
Smokey Bear.
Smokey Bear, sorry, Smokey Bear. Smokey Bear. Ooh. So we're into
Bees.
Geez. Okay, every exhibit starts with a good start. You know, you have to have a strong idea, you have to have a box that you're going to. Do you want to sit? Okay, come in. So you don't try and have your head around. I think when you're starting is to start off with the premise of this is what I'm going to show and how I'm going to show it. And that's the difficult thing, is where do you start? How do you get the start? Also, every exhibit is a work in progress. You said you had a vermeil, then you went down and your heart was torn out. It goes up, it goes down. My husband has what reckons it's 10 reworkings, for every goal. I mean, you get it, you take it home, you look at what the criticisms were. One of the things we say is if you hear something in an evaluation that once, think about it, maybe yeah, maybe not. If you hear it twice, seriously consider it. If you hear the same thing 3 times, then you know that 3 different juries have looked at this, there's obviously a problem. So you should think what they've said. An exhibit is not a collection. And I think this is where you're getting over the hump from having a collection of butterfly stamps to making it into a. And it's not a written story with illustrations. It's not a thesis. So often we have. Good morning, James.
Good morning.
Hello, Jane. So often we have people who are history buffs and write an exhibit, and they want to tell you everything about the subject. And they say, oh, well, I'll just put a few stamps in to illustrate. It's not. The stamps, the philatelic material is the guiding line. It's the thread that you're going to attach everything to. It's not an article or handbook. Yes, the maximum you can have is 10 frames, not 20 frames. I mean, a lot of people would like 20 frames, but after a while it's like, it gets a little more boring. An exhibit has a purpose to tell a story or make a point. And I think with you, Rick, this is what you're going to, is how you're going to figure out how many butterfly stamps do you think you have?
I don't even know how to begin to count.
As I said before, it uses the philatelic material to guide the person through the exhibit. And then you need to identify what you're showing and how you're using it to make the point.
Can you define brief?
Brief captions? Two
One
lines?
line,
Two lines, 3 lines, at the most. I mean, when you're talking, well, we'll get into a bit more than traditional. When you're talking about a stamp, you really need to you're talking about the stamp, you're talking about the color, you're talking about the perforations, you're talking about the value. And when you're talking about the story, you can put that in a headline and then show the material, as opposed to doing whole big paragraphs underneath. Think of a museum of Greek vases. I mean, if you go to the museum, you've got these beautiful vases and there's a tiny little caption saying what it is, but you're looking at the vase. That is what you're trying to do in your stamp exhibit. You're trying to show your item. And this is a little bit of explanation as to what. It's just not a line of vases. It's a selection. You've chosen the best that you have, and you're just showing it the development of the Greek vases through the years. And what we're trying to do with a stamp exhibit is to show the evolvement, if you're doing a traditional, the evolvement of the stamp, how it started from the original drawing to its use. How to start an exhibit? Well, have an interest in the subject. How did you start with butterflies?
Bought some, oh, those are nice.
How long have you been collecting them?
83.
So that's 20, not quite 20,
Almost 30 years.
30 years. How did you start on your bees?
I am a beekeeper and I saw a bee stamp and I said, wow, what a great way to connect my two hobbies together.
And smoke bear? Smoky bear?
I was in the Air Force for 35 years and I flew a firefighting mission working with the Forest Service, who owns Smoky Bear.
Mr. Harding?
Well, he was my cousin, distant cousin, and I lived in his hometown.
I'm sorry, the subject is?
Harding.
Harding. Memorial stamps on the first day covers. And you bring it to Sarasota. Yeah.
I am, but as a foreframe instead of one.
Yes, I saw that. I'm very pleased to see how it's increased. Okay, so you have to have an interest. Why am I collecting this? Why do I like it? I collect food. I had a catering business, and I like to eat and I like to drink. And so when I started collecting, I found out that there were advertising covers that had food on them and equipment. And then I could find stamps that had food on them. And so what I do, and I have one here on the floor, is I do menus and recipes using food stamps, using food and covers. And so I have a big 6-frame exhibit on a menu from Portland Hotel. And so that's how what my interest was. And then I've been expanding into doing different things because being a judge, I wanted to do revenues and traditional, and so I've gone off to do different classes. But my passion is food, and I love advertising covers. I have masses of them. So you have a collection of philatelic material on the subject. Where are we going to go from now? How are we going to organize it? How are we going to subdivide it? Getting rare stuff is sometimes not the problem. I have an exhibit on Bolivian. It's a modern stamp, it's 1951. And believe it or not, I can find a lot of archival material, the original, how they did the essays. I got some photo montages, I got some proofs, I got some dye blues, some color trials and stuff. What I can't find is actual stamps on cover. because it's 1951, it's a sort of more esoteric sports stamp, it's Bolivian, and a lot of the dealers don't carry it. So in my case, the archival material is easy to get, and in fact I have a problem, downless problem at the moment, because I got more archival material than I have use. And one of the problems I'm having with the juries is I'm showing one stamp, there's a set of 14, and I'm showing one stamp on cover for each of the stamps. In a traditional one, you usually show multiple usages of each stamp. Well, I can't find that. I mean, I've been very lucky in the fact I got 14 different covers with different stamps on them, let alone having 2 or 3 frames. And so we have a little argue with the jury saying, well, this is a multi-frame exhibit. And I say, no, it's not, because I don't have the material. So that's why we're still in a 1-frame base.
Quick question.
Yes.
Philatelic material, I had a discussion with critiques on that. Is postcards considered philatelic material?
If you're doing a postcard exhibit. If you're doing a postcard exhibit.
Postcard exhibit. What if I want to do a multiple with first day covers, Cinderellas?
Then you're doing a display class.
Display cards.
We will get into that.
Okay.
Display class, you can put in philatelic material and non-philatelic material. Okay, so you've got to do how to start an exhibit. You've got to come up with your story. What is the premise? What is your box that you're going to use? Okay, smoke again. What's your story?
It became entity because of World War II, and he's still in use today, longest running public service campaign in the U.S. But again, back to the philatelic material. A first day cover is a philatelic material. Yes?
If you're doing a first day cover exhibit like Jim does, I mean, Jim is on what's called illustrated mail from a traditional format, because he's also using the issuance of the stamp and the first day covers. If you're doing a first day cover exhibit, then you're just doing purely first day covers and stamps. You can't bring in the postcards and the other material.
But under the display, I can bring in
Yes.
first day covers
Yes.
and postcards.
And postcards. And photographs. And badges. And bits of Smokey's fur.
Okay. I have those.
Oh no, I mean, we have a Canadian guy who's done a fabulous display exhibit on the beaver. And he has a piece of beaver skin in it, beaver fur. Okay, you and your bees, I mean.
About beekeepers and bees, the relationship with the world, really.
Okay. And your butterflies.
I've got 3 or 4 different directions considering, but the one that I've thought the most about is butterflies in Indiana.
Okay.
And I have a couple of books that show the full sequence of what's been found, and trying to find all of those on stamps is a little difficult.
I think, particularly for you two, when you're doing bees and butterflies, it used to be years ago there was what we would call topical. And the topical class was there's literally stamps with bees, bears, whatever you wanted, was on the stamp. And that's what they were. They were just put up, and it was as a collection. And it has evolved over time now that we're telling stories. So whether you want to, in your case, if you want to tell the story of beekeeping, then you need to bring in this other stuff, I mean, like honey and how they collect the honey, the equipment. You know, so you bring in other stuff that's not bees on stamps. And the same with yours. I mean, if you talk about Indiana and butterflies, you know, what do they eat? Where do they fly? What are the towns? You know, are the towns from the butterflies and stuff? You have to think beyond your subject matter. So what is the purpose? And this afternoon, I'm not going to get into title page and synopsis. Pat Walker will be giving us a seminar at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and I encourage you to come there because it's really important. every exhibit, and when we go to judge the exhibit, we look for what is the purpose of the exhibit. What is the exhibitor trying to show us, trying to tell us that he's going to show? I'm going to show the involvement of Smokey Bear. I'm going to show how the butterflies are shown in Indiana. I'm going to describe beekeeping. I'm going to do the traditional stamps of Harding and his first and the original first day covers. When you define the purpose, then we go look at your exhibit and see how well you have filled your purpose. A lot of exhibits start off with a history lesson. And at the bottom of it says, oh, by the way, this is how I'm going to show it. We don't really need the background. The history lesson should be in the exhibit. What we need you on the front page is to say, my story is going to be this. And then we're going to look at how well did you do the story. What is the story? This is the hard part and where most exhibits are weak, because they haven't thought through what the purpose is. They just said, okay, I got this collection, I think I got a little golden thread here, and I'll just put it up. Nothing, if you don't take anything away from this other than that, make sure that your box is defensible, that you're happy with the box that you have told your story in. Hard to define. It's, you know, when we first started talking about treatment, people say, what's treatment? I mean, what is it? And I basically think it's a golden thread. It's the little red line, it's the golden thread that ties all your pages together. I mean, one thing is, if you go and look at some of the exhibits, and one of the ways that we say, if, God forbid, the frame opened and the whole exhibit fell on the floor, could you put it back by just reading the titles, the headlines on the page? And that's really interesting. I mean, if you go and look at some exhibits on the floor and say, you know, what's the continuity? I mean, in some cases you'll find that each little page is a separate little story and it doesn't really tie into the next page. What do you want to say? I mean, we went around. Do you want to say about how beekeeping started? He wants to say the evolution. You know, so you've got a thought in your mind. So now you've got to sort of refine this thought and keep saying, okay, what do I want to go? Where do I want to go with this? There are many types of exhibits and the stories will vary with type. I mean, when you have traditional stamp shows are when you take a stamp, and you talk about the birth of this stamp. You go back and you talk about the archival material, who did the drawings, how many was printed, how it was printed, and then you go looking for die proofs and essays and any archival material you can have. From then you go on to the issue. What was issued? How many were issued? Were they coil stamps? Were they booklets? Were they canes? And you show those. And then you go on to use. And then you show the use. How were they used? Were they used in singles, multiples? What was the rate they paid? And anything you can find about, and that's what you fill out. And that's where I fall down in my Bolivian, because I don't have a lot of use. Postal history. Postal history is your, and display. We just done tradition. Sorry, I sort of got ahead of myself with my clicking my finger. Traditional exhibitors, store the stamps or group, reproductions, sketches and proofs, etc. The produced stamps, the varieties and the papers. I think in your case, if you're talking about butterflies, you might want to think about the papers that they were built on, the perforations, and as you've got so many butterflies, I think you're going to have to come down to one type of butterfly or moths or something. And then have usage and covers that we were talking about. Okay, this is pretty cutting, but there is one common area. A lot of, when you get to the use, when you get into the usage and the covers, a lot of people start talking about the cover that the stamp is on. Then it gets into postal history. And it becomes what we call a traditory exhibit. And there are a lot of them around, and it's very difficult to try and remember that you're talking about the stamp. You're not really talking about the marking on the cancel on the stamp or where it went to. You're talking about the stamp and what it was paying. So it's very easy to slide in. I mean, also in a traditional, I was actually judging one, and the guy was talking, he was doing cancels, which is the same on the stamp. Which is fine, I mean, you talk about the cancels. And then he suddenly got into talking about the perforation of the stamp underneath. So he had lost the focus of his exhibit. He said, oh, well, this is a lovely stamp underneath. No, 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 we're talking about what's on top of the stamp. So when you're doing a traditional, is to maintain your focus. You're talking about the stamp.
Liz, you've seen my exhibit in the past, and you know I have cancellations on the first day covers. Does that make it postal history when I'm talking about the different cancellations?
No, because you're a first day cover, you're talking about, I mean, it's important for the cancel because it's showing the date.
Right.
But you have to be wary in that it's not the major focus. When you're doing, well, let's go to postal history. Postal history is the story of the covers. One is the rates, and the rates is the stamp and what it was paying, and how it was paying to get where it was going. So, particularly if you're doing stampless period, if you're doing early stuff when it was by weight. So you could then tell the distance of how far it was going by how much it was paying. Routes is how did it get from A to B. And C is markings. Now, in a postal history exhibit, you can show all these three elements on your one cover. But you have to figure out what your focus is. Are you talking about the rates, the routes, or the markings? And whichever one you're focusing on, that is your primary. And then you can talk about the other two underneath. So you're talking about your cancellations. Yes, you're really talking about the stamp, but you're also bringing in the morning covers. And in the morning covers and the first day covers, yes, the cancel is important because that's part of the first day cover. But you have to still maintain your focus on the stamp. It's not like somebody who's doing a traditional exhibit, which is on the history of the stamps, suddenly decides to put a frame of cancels in. Well, it's interesting, but it's not. That's gone back to what's on top of the stamp, as opposed to what's underneath. Okay, in a rate exhibit, it's a history of a defined group of rates. My husband is actually doing one on the inflation of Zimbabwe. And so he goes from 2002 to 2009. And what he's showing is covers that have multiple stamps and the fact that the rates were changing so much. I mean, the rates were changing every day. So he's showing an item that shows how the rate was changing. Transatlantic treaty rates, pre-UPU. There's going to be an exhibit in Sarasota on this. There were various treaties and what the rates were. So this is when you're talking about rates, because you were doing the distances and how much it was paying for them to be carried that way. Exhibit can cover routes and markings, but as I said, they have to be in secondary and tertiary focus. Routes. If you're talking about, I judged an exhibit in Williamsburg just before Christmas, and they were talking about he'd actually started from markings, and he was doing cancels from various places that had water in them. So it was a Macaulay exhibit, but it was just too widespread. So I said to them, why don't you take the various rivers, the Shenandoah and the Potomac, and do your water covers by coming down the river. And you can do some that have done, there's a portage in Wisconsin, and you can do an exhibit of the various places along these routes. You can do train routes. That means that a lot of people who do RPOs, railroad routes, and they go along the railway line. So that's a defined scope of routes. You're talking about a road. You could talk about the establishment of post offices along the road. So you do it that way. A lot of airmail routes. I mean, all of you seen airmail exhibits. If you're doing an airmail exhibit, a lot of them are talking about the actual flights, the first day flights. Others are talking about the routes. Where was the plane flying? And they do exhibits on various places along the route. Again, the rates and the markings will be there, but they're in the secondary or tertiary focus. Markings. The history of postal markings of the town showing the cancels were changed over time. So you're talking about the cancels, you're talking about the stamp, what they're actually known as hammers. And when you're talking about the hammers and the changes, you need to know when the post office was open, when it closed. You can sometimes find out who the postmaster was at the time. You can find out how many cancels there were. If you do the research, you can find out when the cancels change, what shape they took, whether they were double circled, whether they were hand stamped, whether they had dates in them. So there's an enormous amount. I mean, so it's a really fun focus if you want to do cancels. I mean, I've seen some really good ones, and they're fun to do. And again, this exhibit in Williamsburg, they were talking about the names. And so they had done the cancels of the names, and they hadn't really done much in going to the post offices. So it was just a sort of collection of. And then they said that they tried to bring in vegetables and cabbages because they used water. And I said, no. I mean, that's real stretch. These are, if you do a postal history marking, they are difficult to organize, and don't fall into the thing of being alphabetical. Some people say, well, okay, I start with A, and say you're doing Virginia, okay, A's, B's, C's, and D's. Some people do them chronologically. It's more fun if you can organize them by type of cancel or something that makes it a little bit more interesting than, okay, here's all the A's, now we're going to the B's, now we're going to the C's. I wouldn't do this as a first effort because it takes a lot of study, and it's something that you, as you're going along, you suddenly realize how much of these things you have, and oh, maybe I'd like to do that. But it's fun to do. Okay, display, my favorite. Display exhibit, I think, is the best way to start Sunday exhibiting. You aren't bound by so many rules as you are in traditional or postal history. You can put anything in there you want that will fit in the frame. Bear in mind that the frame is only 3/4 of an inch from back into the plexiglass, so you have to limit your item you put in there. If you put it in the center of the frame, sometimes you can bow the frame a bit if it's really big. But I put spoons in, and keychains and bottle holders and stuff. So you can include anything. They also say how much Philatelic, so that it doesn't dominate. So, I mean, if you look at an exhibit and all you see is the paraphilatelic material, do you understand what I mean by paraphilatelic? No.
Not a stamp.
Not a stamp. Paraphilatelic is something that is not philatelic. It's not a cover, it's not a stamp, it's not a postcard, it's not a cancel, it's not a revenue, it's not a meter stamp. So it can be Cinderellas, photographs, badges, boxes, postcards, menus, you name it, you can put it in there. So, and it's a really good way because it's fun to do. As I say, you're not bound by the rules and regulations. Well, you are in a way, because you still have to do the headings and stuff, but it's a real fun way to do it. And if you, particularly if you want to tell a story like you do, and I think probably you as well, you'd find it's very easy because you can bring a lot of extraneous stuff into, particularly if you want to do the history of the beekeeping, because you can even put a piece of mesh that they have as a mask, or you could put in a vial of the smoker that they put in. You know, it gives you a real good scope of putting extra material in there to tell the story. Okay, what is your story? You talked about, so it's first an interest. Secondly, you have the collection that you're working on. If no collection, begin accumulation. Sometimes, I mean, when I first started, I didn't have a collection. I mean, I had some rabbit stamps, but I didn't have any idea what I was going to do with them. Until I went to a show in Biloxi and saw an exhibit on literacy. And it was a display exhibit. And I said, I can do that. That looks like fun. And so I started working on it. My first exhibit was actually on rabbits. I found out that this was 2002, 2001. The year of the rabbit was 1999. And there were a lot of souvenir sheets and a lot of stuff. So I said, oh. And then I thought, well, how can I do it? What can I do with this? You know, I just want to put them up. And so I said, rabbits. And then I thought, okay. I noticed that there were a lot of around the world. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do hip-hop around the world in 24 hours. And I took each time zone, and I found an element for each time zone. And that's how Rabbit left London on the GMT, and he went around the world in 24 hours. And it was a one-frame exhibit. And it got up to being a vermeil. I don't think we'll go, because I've got too many souvenir sheets in. Again, because it's a modern stamp, we want a lot of stuff on cover. So he's back in his hutch at the moment. He's waiting until I find some more archival material. So I started accumulating, and then I got into the food and the menus, and so I went into accumulation. I'm still accumulating. Now the hard part. Write in one sentence, the purpose of my exhibit is, you all got a piece of paper? I haven't got it.
That's where I've been stuck for 5 years.
Well, we're gonna have a little discussion. So,
Let's see if I have it. Here, this is Sunday's program. I'm not going to do it for Sunday.
I have a program here.
Maybe it's before.
Thank you.
we'll get you into this.
Yeah, I don't think so. It's interesting.
Okay. You said one sentence, right?
Long
Not a thesis. you've got a real big thing. I mean, okay, so I think you need to be some aspect. I mean, the honey, because you could go way. I mean, you can talk about pollination. You can talk. I mean, how they pollinate the fruit. I mean, one of the problems with the bees at the moment is the bees are dying off, and they're going to not be pollinating the fruit to get them. So how it involves agriculture, how it involves the honey production, you've got to really...
Like I could narrow it down to like how bees make honey, sort of thing?
Yep.
Okay.
How bees make honey, how bees pollinate, so that's why we're trying to refine it down so that, because you have to be able to fulfill that story. And when you've got it in the environment, there's a whole way you could lose your focus.
I just want to add for her,
Yeah.
in June will be NAPEX, and they have one frame exhibits and this year the letters is E. And E, your environment would fit in there really well. But, I put, purpose of my exhibit is to show how Smoky Bear has grown from an attempt to support the country in World War II to the longest running public service campaign in U.S. history.
It's very nebulous. Because because you're putting a thought into. I mean, jump on this. This is an open forum discussion. You're putting into an attempt, whereas it did happen. I mean, it actually has.
Submarine surfaced off of California and started lobbing incendiary devices into oil fields. So they said they could fight. If the Japanese did that in our forest in California, then we had to prevent the man-made fires. And in order to do that, they came up with a campaign, Smoky Bear.
Yeah.
And then it's no longer the World War II thing, but it's still a prevention.
I think if you took out the attempt.
Okay. Grown from a support, grown from World War II support to the longest running public service campaign in the U.S.
From like your sentence standpoint, I think that's a lot better than just like your word watching, like the attempt to make it sound like it really didn't take off.
Yeah.
Like you gotta like really insinuate that like it started this way and it grew through this instead of like, they started it this way and they attempted to do it and then it really took off. You want to say it started, as a service campaign and grew into something much bigger than that it became a national identity or something like that.
Rick, number 2.
Okay. I don't know how to go about this, but the purpose of my exhibit is to show why some butterflies, once populous, are now rare in Indiana.
Okay.
And the problem I'm going to have is the rare ones are rare or non-existent on stamps.
Okay. Yes, because in that, you could use the display to show the rare butterflies. But in the fact, it's a philatelic exhibit, and you've got, you're talking about the rare butterflies. They really should be
Stamps.
on the stamp. Yeah.
I've got covers that show illustrations, but not stamps. And thinking of Carter's Blue, which is from the Dunes region.
But when you're saying a cover, you're talking first day covers.
Well, this happens to be a cover from a Carter Blue Society in Wisconsin.
Okay.
I've got those kinds of things, but not actual stamps, because I'm thinking of the new issue for oversized mail that uses the stamps, and they just came out with, they had a Baltimore checker, but that was on one of the original stamps. Why couldn't they have put Connor Blue on one of those stamps?
Well, maybe you should have lobbied for it.
Well, and that's, I'm considering that.
Yeah.
I would think if you're worried about finding those rare stamps, I would change my standpoint to like, the purpose of my exhibit is to study the rise and fall of butterfly populations in Indiana. So then, like, when you talk about butterfly populations going down, then you can come in with, you know, this certain species and be like, so this species really started to decline, and then move on to, and when this species started to decline, this one grew, and so it's like focusing.
I mean, I thought along all those lines, and, you know, obviously, some of them, like a monarch and so forth, I mean, those are literally hundreds of monarch stamps.
But yeah, I mean, for the monarchs, I mean, because they are literally, I mean, the great thing about the monarchs is you could do their roots, and the milkweed, and why they are flying, and how they fly. I mean, that would be a brilliant exhibit.
Well, but again, I understand.
Yeah.
It's just deciding, you know, can I build energy around one of these things? And that's been the difficulty. I'm a great procrastinator.
But I think, well, I think both, I think, Amber? Autumn. Sorry, I knew.
It's all right.
I think, you know, her idea of the rise and fall, rather than specific, you know, saying that you've got the rare butterflies, I think the monarchs, you could probably do the monarchs in a one frame. If you were doing the roots of them. Because, I mean, how many monarch butterfly stamps do you want to show?
Oh, that's a good question.
You know, I mean, yes, there are hundreds of stamps of monarchs on them, but when you're trying to tell the story, you
How do I, yeah, the question becomes, how do I select which stamps to use, or which covers to use, or whatever?
right.
I understand.
And sometimes if you, I mean, a one-frame exhibit, as Jim has found, is not the easiest. Sometimes it is easy because it
What, about
16
12
pages.
16 pages.
it brings down.
You're fine.
Okay. It brings down your focus is to, okay, if I'm going to do 16 pages, what would I put in those 16 pages? And then sometimes that is easier than saying, how am I going to fill up 5 frames? Your servant, your purpose.
My purpose is to demonstrate the development of the Hurley Memorial issue and its first days.
I like that. I like the fact you're taking, dump the cover, word cover out.
Yes.
Yes. Nice. See, when you think, you know, you have to think about things and what, no, doing in one sentence. Okay, so we've done, okay, what is the scope? The box, scope is the box of your limits. Okay, we're going to talk about the monarchs. What is your defensible box? If you're doing the monarch route, so you're showing the roots of the monarch. Okay, up and down, there we go. You've got the time period of your harding. With your beams, what is your scope? What is your box?
I would think if I take a new direction, it would, my new box would be making honey.
Making honey. So that's for you. Smoky Bear.
I've got everything from first day covers, Cinderella's, development of first day covers, the original artwork, letters on development of stamps, which used Smoky Bear as the cancel, not the stamp. That I think is all in the Smoky Bear story. But how do I define that in a scope so that when they go looking at everything's inclusive in there?
Yeah. I mean, this is where, you know, this is where you have this little gives you. I mean, you can also do it in the timeline. I mean, you can have from, you know, the year dot to year dot. I mean, that's another scope. Again, with you, it's sort of, you know, yes, you've got a whole lot of material, but where's your depth? I mean, if you showed everything you're not going into depth with it.
And this is where I heard you talking about the one frame. I went from 3 frames at spring packs, and then I figured for Napex I can do working up to 5. And if the 5 was, I had so much more material, but I didn't have it I didn't have the box limiting it. Whereas with the 3 frames, I was able to, I think, include more in my scope of
Yeah.
what
The depth of it.
the depth of it. Yeah.
And again, with you, if you were making honey, you know, you've got some depth in that as opposed to bees in the environment. You see what we're talking about, you know, that having a box and having the depth. And if you do the monarchs, I mean, you've got a confined scope. Box must be defensible. Sometimes we come around, you know, I'm going from this date to that date. Why? Well, that's the earliest cover I have, and that's the latest one I have. That's not a defensible one. I mean, if you're doing it, you know, if it's around an event, this was World War II, this was something here, this was something here, that it's dependable. And good fillers are a reason for the boundaries. And so you can't start with the earliest cover you have, that's not a reason, unless it was the first day issue. As we're running out of time, I had to combine 2 seminars into one because we lost time this afternoon. So I'm just going to whip through these. Treatment, we were talking about treatment in the storyline. This is how you tell your story. In judging, it also includes the title and the title page. And as I said, this afternoon, Pat Walker will be doing title page and synopsis. Please come to that because it's a very good seminar and it will help you. If you want, starting, and particularly for you, is maybe this, okay, I'm going with monarchs. Start selecting your material, lay it out in a logical way for you, the story of honey. Lay it out so that you can see what you've got. Will it fit in and fill the box that you've talked about? Will it tell a story? And are there holes in the story that you need to go and accumulate?
Like for something I did with, I had a couple of tables like that one in my basement, and I laid out some large cardboard sheets, drew them in, that would hold 16 pages. And I laid that out, and then day by day, I would go down and look at it, and then I would change something, or add something, take something out, and I did that for a while. And I probably rushed it a little bit when I grew the exhibit from 3 to 5, which is why I didn't do it row 5. But it helped me by being able to talk about laying it out. If you're trying to do it 1 page at a time and put that one away and do another one, it didn't. I tried that for a while and it didn't work.
We actually we took cardboard sheets like you had, we put some door stripping on them, and then we put them up on easels. Because, and looked at it vertically once you started doing your pages, because you can't do it page by page. You have to be able to look at the whole thing. And you say it doesn't seem to work, so we moved it around. Try various sequences, changes of scope and story. We were talking earlier, if an exhibit fell out of the page, out of the frame, could you put it back? Because each page should be linked to the next one, otherwise not the whole series of individual pages. Must be a logical sequence in the page. I'm sorry, rush this. Are you people waiting outside?
There's a few, but we don't start till 11.
Okay, we talked about the golden thread earlier. Keep that in mind when you're telling your story. I mean, go through the golden thread. The golden thread is what holds you together. And it's golden because it's gold and it's thread and it's thick and it's really the most positive thing that you can think of in your exhibit is to keep the golden thread. And the golden thread should run continuously from items with a page and chapters. Test. What we were talking about, dropping them on the floor. Does this make a difference? If not, try. I'm not going to get into this would like to spend more time on it. And so we will adjourn here, and I will do another seminar at Stamp Show. Maybe people coming to Stamp Show? Milwaukee in August.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I will redo this as a second part, and we will continue from there. Sorry for rushing the last end, but we had a good time. I think thank you all for coming, and I hope you learned something, and please continue, and I look forward to seeing your exhibit on the floor.
You should all be aware of something that Liz did. She did a one-framer on apple pie, and she did it as illustrated mail. And when we first worked on that, it was a great story, but she had kind of messed up her scope a little bit. In that she had a recipe from a book that was not within the time period of the material that she was showing. She discussed that apple pie became an American dessert, shall we say, an American dish, as American as apple pie during this particular time period. Well, she had to have a recipe from that time period, not quoting a book outside that time period. Then she had something with a blackjack on it. Well, that was too early. And she had a couple of covers that were foreign. They didn't belong in it. This is American. When she got all of that stuff replaced, she absolutely nailed it. And in the last one-frame competition at Collectors Club of New York, she got one of 3 awards of merit against incredibly rare material, because she had picked something where in one frame she could just do it to perfection. So she's giving you the right lead.
Thank you very much. Okay, great guys, thank you. See you on the run.